3 days after the Battle of New Sol, Veltar received his first encrypted communication from Council Command. The message appeared on his personal terminal late at night, when most of the human crew was sleeping. The simple text carried implications that made his blood run cold. Observer Veltar, submit immediate preliminary assessment. Other observers report unusual patterns. Council requires urgent analysis of human controllability factors. Do not delay. Veltar stared at the message for several minutes. Other observers. The Council had not sent him alone to study humanity. There were others, watching different aspects of human civilization, and they were all reporting unusual patterns. He opened his files and began composing a response, but stopped when he realized what he was about to write. The truth about what he had witnessed was too dangerous to transmit over any communication channel. If the Council understood what humans really were, if they truly grasped the implications, instead, he wrote a carefully neutral preliminary report. Humans display higher than average aggression and casualty tolerance. Recommend continued observation before final assessment. Full report to follow. It was a lie by omission, but Veltar found he could not bring himself to write the full truth. Not yet. Over the following weeks, more encrypted messages arrived. Observer Kithmar reported that humans were building massive industrial complexes on every world they colonized. Not just mining operations or manufacturing centers, but facilities designed for total resource conversion. As if they were preparing to turn entire planets into war production centers. Observer Gentai documented human scientific advancement accelerating under pressure. Instead of being weakened by conflict, human innovation increased. They were developing new technologies, new weapons, new defensive systems at a rate that defied all known patterns of technological development. Most disturbing was Observer Krelnan's report from a human medical facility. He had been studying human psychology under stress and found something that violated every assumption about sentient behavior. Humans who had been captured and tortured by enemies refused to provide information, even when threatened with death. More than refused, they seemed to become psychologically stronger after surviving such experiences. Veltar thought about Medical Officer Cha, who had been captured during a border skirmish 2 weeks ago. The young doctor had been held for 6 days before a human rescue operation freed him. When Veltar asked about his experience, Cha had simply said, "They wanted to know about our medical capabilities. I told them nothing useful." But Cha had not seemed traumatized by his captivity. If anything, he appeared more determined than before. He had immediately returned to duty and began developing new battlefield medical techniques based on observations he had made while imprisoned. "I learned things about our enemies," Cha had explained to Veltar. "Weaknesses in their equipment, flaws in their procedures, information that could save human lives in future encounters." The human had been tortured for intelligence, and instead of being broken by the experience, he had gathered intelligence about his captors. Veltar began studying other human crew members more carefully. What he found challenged everything he thought he understood about individual versus collective behavior. Humans did not fight like individuals who happened to be working together. They fought like components of a single organism responding to threat. When one human was injured, others automatically adjusted their behavior to compensate. When one human was captured, the rest became more focused and dangerous, not less. He watched this phenomenon during a small engagement with hegemony raiders near the asteroid belt. When pilot Aaron was shot down during the battle, her squadron did not become demoralized or disorganized. Instead, they became more efficient, more ruthless. They hunted down every enemy fighter with methodical precision, as if avenging their fallen comrade was the most important task in the universe. "It is not about revenge," Squadron Leader Juan explained later. "It is about making sure they understand that killing one of us makes all of us more dangerous. If our enemies think human deaths make us weaker, they will target us more often. We cannot allow that." Veltar realized he was documenting something unprecedented in galactic history. Most species became less aggressive when they suffered losses. Humans became more aggressive. They used their own casualties as motivation to inflict greater damage on their enemies. But the most terrifying discovery came when he gained access to human strategic planning databases. What he found there made him understand why the Council was really concerned about human controllability. Humans were not just fighting a defensive war against the hegemony, they were planning for the possibility of total species survival. Deep in classified files, Veltar found contingency plans that assumed the complete defeat of human military forces. But defeat in human planning did not mean surrender. It meant transitioning to a different kind of warfare. Project Phoenix detailed plans for converting civilian infrastructure into military production centers. Every human colony had hidden manufacturing capabilities that could produce weapons and equipment indefinitely. Every human settlement included underground shelters stocked with supplies for years of resistance fighting. Project Lazarus went further. It outlined procedures for preserving human culture and knowledge even if their entire civilization was destroyed. Automated systems would continue broadcasting human history, literature, and scientific knowledge throughout the galaxy. Hidden, colonies with self-sustaining populations would remain dormant until conditions allowed them to emerge and rebuild. Most chilling was Project Nemesis. Veltar could only access portions of this file, but what he read made his hands shake. It appeared to be a plan for ensuring that any species that successfully destroyed humanity would never benefit from their victory. Automated weapon systems hidden throughout human space would activate if human civilization fell. They would target enemy supply lines, colonies, and infrastructure for generations after the war ended. The humans were not just prepared to fight until death. They were prepared to continue fighting after death. Veltar closed the files and sat in darkness, trying to process what he had learned. Humanity was not just a young species with aggressive tendencies. They were something fundamentally different from every other civilization the Council had encountered. They had evolved not just as a social species, but as a species that treated survival as an absolute imperative. They would sacrifice anything, their lives, their civilization, their planet, to ensure that their core values and their people continued to exist. And those values included protecting other species from oppression. Veltar remembered something. Captain Jiho had said during their first meeting, "Humans have always been at war with someone, it is what we do." At the time, he had interpreted this as a statement about human aggression. Now he understood it differently. Humans were always at war because they refused to accept injustice, oppression, or threats to innocent life. They fought not because they enjoyed violence, but because they could not tolerate a universe where the strong preyed on the weak without consequence. This realization led to an even more disturbing thought. If humans were willing to sacrifice everything to protect strangers, what would they do if the Council itself became a threat? What would happen if humanity decided that the galactic order was unjust? The answer was obvious and terrifying. They would fight the entire galaxy if necessary. And based on what Veltar had observed, they might actually win. That night, he received another encrypted message from Council Command. This one was different, more urgent. Observer Veltar. Intelligence indicates humans are developing weapons technologies beyond their supposed advancement level. Recommend immediate assessment of threat potential. Consider possibility of preemptive action to contain expansion. Veltar stared at the message for a long time. Preemptive action. The Council was considering attacking humanity before they became too dangerous to control. He thought about the crew of the Tyaguk, Captain Jiho, who treated him as an honored guest, Engineer Nabi, who sang while risking her life to save others, Medical Officer Cha, who gathered intelligence while being tortured to help protect his comrades, Communications Officer Sumin, who could not understand why anyone would find protecting innocent people controversial. These humans had shown him more kindness and acceptance than he had ever experienced from his own people. They had protected him during battles, included him in their conversations, shared their food and their stories with genuine warmth. And now his government was planning to destroy them because they were too dangerous to allow to exist. Veltar deleted the message without responding. For the first time in his life, he was going to disobey direct orders from the Council. because he was beginning to understand that if the Council attacked humanity, they would not just be starting a war. They would be creating an enemy that would never, ever stop fighting back, and that enemy would be justified in everything they did in response. The thought of what humans would become if they believed the entire galaxy was against them made Veltar physically ill. Some doors, once opened, could never be closed again, and the Council was about to kick down the wrong door. Veltar adjusted his breathing apparatus as he walked through the pristine halls of the Galactic Research Institute. The morning light from 3 suns filtered through the crystal walls, casting rainbow patterns across the white floors. He had worked here for 15 cycles, studying dozens of species across the galaxy. Today felt like any other day. His supervisor, Director Kethnal, waited in the briefing chamber. The old alien's 4 eyes gleamed with what Veltar recognized as mild amusement. Behind him, a holographic display showed a small blue planet rotating slowly in space. "Veltar, you have a new assignment," Director Kethnal said, his voice carrying the formal tone used for official business. "The Council has discovered a new species. They call themselves humans." Veltar looked at the planet on the display. It seemed ordinary enough. Water, land masses, a single moon. He had seen dozens like it. "What makes them special, Director?" "They have just developed faster-than-light travel, very recently, but they are already expanding into contested space near the hegemony border." The Director touched a control, and the display zoomed out to show star systems marked in red. "The Council wants to know if they pose any threat." Veltar studied the map. The human expansion looked small compared to the vast territories of established civilizations. "How many worlds do they control?" 12 systems, maybe 15 now." Director Kethanol waved a dismissive appendage. "They are very young as a spacefaring species, but the hegemony has already had some contact with them. Military contact, small raids, border skirmishes. Nothing serious." The director's tone suggested this was completely normal. "The humans have been fighting back instead of negotiating. The Council wants to understand their military thinking." Veltar nodded. Every species eventually faced this choice when they met established powers. Most chose diplomacy and trade agreements. Some tried to fight and quickly learned the futility of resisting superior numbers and technology. The few that continued, fighting usually destroyed themselves within a few cycles. "I assume they follow standard patterns?" Veltar asked. "Limited engagements, structured retreats, reasonable casualty thresholds?" "That is what you will determine." Director Kethanol handed him a data tablet. "You will observe a human military vessel, document their tactics, command structure, and psychological responses to combat stress. The Council expects a standard threat assessment within 2 cycles." Veltar accepted the tablet and reviewed his orders. Observe and report. Simple enough. He had done this before with the Korthak Rebellion and the Venturi Independence Movement. Both had ended predictably. The rebels eventually accepted Council authority after losing enough battles to realize resistance was pointless. "Which ship will I observe?" he asked. "A vessel called the Teguk. It is commanded by someone named Jiho. The humans have agreed to accept a Council observer." Director Kethnal seemed pleased by this cooperation. They are very accommodating for such a young species. 2 days later, Veltar found himself aboard a Council transport approaching the human ship. Through the viewport, he could see the Teguk waiting at the rendezvous point. The vessel looked functional but unremarkable. Gray metal hull, standard, weapon emplacements, communications arrays that seemed almost primitive compared to Council technology. The transport docked with a soft thud. Veltar gathered his observation equipment and recording devices, then walked through the airlock. He expected to be met by guards or maybe a junior officer who would escort him to his quarters. Instead, a human wearing captain's insignia waited for him personally. The man was shorter than Veltar but moved with confident precision. His dark hair was cut short, and his eyes held an alertness that reminded Veltar of predator species. "Observer Veltar? I am Captain Jiho." The human extended his hand in what Veltar knew was a greeting gesture. "Welcome aboard the Teguk. Veltar carefully shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip. "Thank you for accepting my presence, Captain. I will try not to interfere with your operations." "You are not an interference. You are our guest." Captain Jiho smiled, and Veltar was surprised to find the expression seemed genuine. "Let me show you to your quarters, then introduce you to my senior staff." As they walked through the ship's corridors, Veltar observed everything. The walls were metal, painted in neutral colors. Crew members moved with purpose, nodding respectfully to their captain. The air smelled of recycled atmosphere and something else. Something like determination, though Veltar knew that was impossible to smell. "How large is your crew?" Veltar asked. 237 souls, Captain Jiho replied. "We are what humans call a destroyer. Fast, maneuverable, designed for patrol and escort duties." They stopped at a door marked with alien symbols that Veltar's translator rendered as guest quarters. The room inside was small but comfortable, with a bed, desk, and viewing port. Someone had placed a small plant near the window, an unexpected touch that made the space feel less military. "My tactical officer Mira will brief you on our current mission," Captain Jiho said. "We are patrolling the Kepler sector. Intelligence suggests hegemony raiders have been testing our defenses there." Veltar set down his equipment. "How do you typically respond to such raids?" "We stop them." The captain's answer was simple and direct. "The hegemony seems to think we will back down if they apply enough pressure. They are welcome to test that theory." Something in the human's tone made Veltar look at him more carefully. Most species spoke of military action with reluctance or resignation. Captain Jiho sounded almost eager was not the right word. Ready, perhaps. Like a tool designed for its purpose. "Captain, may I ask a personal question?" "Of course. How many battles have you fought?" Captain Jiho considered this. "Against the hegemony? 6 major engagements, maybe 20 smaller ones against other enemies." He shrugged. "Humans have always been at war with someone. It is what we do." Veltar filed this response away for his report. The casual acceptance of constant warfare was unusual, but not unprecedented. Some species were naturally aggressive until they learned the cost of fighting superior forces. A young woman in tactical officer's uniform approached them. "Captain, we have received new orders from command." "Thank you, Mira." Captain Jiho turned to Veltar. "It appears we will have an opportunity to show you human military operations sooner than expected. Hegemony ships have been detected near the mining colony on Kepler 442. We are ordered to investigate." Veltar felt a familiar anticipation. This would be his first chance to observe human military doctrine in action. Based on his previous studies, he expected to see a cautious approach, perhaps some long-range scanning, careful positioning, and attempts at communication before any shooting began. "How long until we reach the colony?" he asked. 8 hours, at maximum speed," Mira replied. "We should arrive just after the hegemony ships do." Captain Jiho nodded toward Veltar. "You will observe from the bridge during the engagement. I want you to see exactly how humans fight when our people are threatened." As they walked toward the bridge, Veltar began composing his initial observations. The humans seemed professional and well-organized. Their ship was clean and efficiently run. Captain Jiho displayed the kind of confidence typical of experienced military commanders. Everything appeared completely normal for a young military force. Veltar expected to document a few skirmishes, analyze some basic tactical decisions, and file a routine report recommending continued monitoring with minimal concern. He had no idea that within hours, everything he thought he knew about warfare would begin to crumble. The bridge of the Teguk hummed with quiet activity as they approached Kepler 442. Veltar sat at an observation station, his recording devices capturing everything. Around him, human crew members worked at their stations with calm efficiency. No one seemed particularly worried about the upcoming encounter. "Contact bearing 270, reported the sensor operator, a young man named Doyen. 3 hegemony raiders, frigate class. They are positioned between us and the colony." Captain Jiho studied the tactical display. "Any sign of the colonists?" Mining platforms have gone dark, Mira said from her position at the tactical station. Could be hiding, could be. She did not finish the sentence. Veltar expected the captain to proceed carefully. Standard military doctrine called for assessment of enemy strength, attempts at communication, and measured escalation. Most species preferred to avoid unnecessary casualties. Helm, take us in at full speed, Captain Jiho ordered. Mira, charge all weapons. Doyun, transmit to the hegemony ships. They have 10 seconds to withdraw, or we will destroy them. Veltar looked up from his equipment in surprise. Captain, should you not attempt negotiation first? Perhaps determine their intentions? Captain Jiho turned to him with an expression Veltar could not read. Observer, their intentions became clear the moment they positioned themselves to threaten our people. Negotiations can wait until after we remove the threat. The 10 seconds passed in tense silence. The hegemony ships did not move. Time's up, Captain Jiho said quietly. Mira, open fire. The Taiguk shuddered as its weapons launched. Veltar watched the tactical display as energy beams and missiles streaked toward the enemy vessels. The hegemony ships immediately returned fire, and space around them filled with explosions and energy bursts. What happened next shattered every assumption Veltar had made about human military doctrine. The first hegemony salvo struck the Taiguks, portside, causing significant damage. Veltar expected Captain Jiho to withdraw and reassess as any rational commander would when facing superior numbers. Instead, the captain ordered an aggressive attack run directly between two enemy ships. Damage report, Captain Jiho called as the ship shook under enemy fire. Port engines at 60%, Doyun reported, blood running from a cut on his forehead. Shields down to 40%. Hull breach on deck 7, added another crew member. Sealing emergency bulkheads. By any reasonable standard, the Taiguk was taking too much damage to continue fighting. Most species would begin withdrawal procedures to preserve the ship and crew. Veltar waited for the inevitable order to retreat. It never came. Target their lead ship, Captain Jiho ordered. Full spread, all weapons. Sir, our shields are failing, Mira warned. We cannot take much more damage. Then we make sure they take more damage than we do, the captain replied calmly. Veltar watched in growing horror as the battle continued. The humans did not fight like any species he had studied. They did not calculate acceptable losses or preserve resources for future battles. They fought as if this single engagement was the most important thing in the universe. Lieutenant Doyen continued coordinating sensor readings even after a console explosion sent shrapnel into his left arm. He wrapped the wound with his uniform shirt and kept working. When Veltar approached to help, Doyen waved him away. I am fine, the young human said through gritted teeth. Just a scratch. Veltar stared at the injury. Blood soaked through the makeshift bandage. The wound needed immediate medical attention, yet Doyen remained at his post, hands steady on his controls. Another explosion rocked the ship. The lights flickered, and Veltar heard the sound of stressed metal groaning throughout the hull. Through the bridge viewports he could see one of the hegemony ships burning, its weapons silent, but the other two continued their attack. Engineering. Reports power coupling failures, came a voice over the communication system. I am going outside to fix them manually. Negative, Captain Jiho responded. Too dangerous with all this weapons fire. Sir, without those couplings we lose weapons and shields, the voice replied. Veltar's translator identified the speaker as Engineer Nabi. I can fix them in 5 minutes. The radiation alone will kill you. Maybe. But if I do not fix them, we all die anyway. Veltar listened to this exchange with growing disbelief. The engineer was volunteering for what sounded like a suicide mission. No rational being would accept such odds. Do it, Captain Jiho said quietly. Good luck, Nabi. Through the ship's internal monitors, Veltar watched as Engineer Nabi suited up and went outside into the deadly space around the ship. Weapons fire from both sides created a lethal maze of energy beams and explosions. Any one of them could kill her instantly. But she did not hesitate. Moving with practiced skill, she reached the damaged coupling and began repairs. While enemy fire streaked past her position, she worked calmly and methodically, and she was singing. Veltar could hear her voice over the communication channel, a soft, melodic song in what his translator said was an ancient human language. She sang while repairing critical systems in the middle of a space battle, as if she were working in a peaceful garden instead of a war zone. Power couplings restored, she reported 5 minutes later, safely back inside the ship. Weapons and shields at full capacity. The tide of battle shifted immediately. With full power restored, the Teguk's weapons found their mark on the second hegemony ship. It exploded in a brilliant flash that lit up the bridge. The third enemy vessel began to withdraw. "Let them go," Mira asked. "No," Captain Jiho said firmly. "They came here to hurt our people. They do not get to just leave and try again later." The Teguk pursued the fleeing ship and destroyed it before it could escape to hyperspace. Veltar sat in stunned silence as the crew began damage assessment and casualty reports. 37 crew members had been wounded. 5 had died. The ship itself had taken massive damage that would require weeks in space dock to repair. By any military standard, Veltar knew this had been a disaster. The humans had taken casualties that would cripple most species' willingness to continue fighting. They had damaged their ship so severely that it was barely space-worthy. Yet the mood on the bridge was not one of defeat or mourning. It was satisfaction. Colony. Platforms coming back online, Doyen reported. All civilian personnel accounted for and safe. "Good work, everyone," Captain Jiho announced. "Medical teams to Deck 7. Engineering teams assess damage. We will escort the mining ships to safety, then head home for repairs." As the crew dispersed to their duties, Veltar approached the captain. "May I ask you something?" "Of course. You lost 5 crew members. Your ship is badly damaged. Was this victory worth the cost?" Captain Jiho looked at him with an expression of genuine puzzlement. "Observer, they threatened our people, our civilians, miners and their families who came out here to build a better life." He gestured toward the tactical display showing the safe colony. "How is protecting them not worth any cost?" Veltar had no answer for this. In his experience, military forces weighed costs and benefits. They preserved resources for future conflicts. They accepted strategic losses to maintain overall strength. These humans had fought as if nothing else mattered except this single battle. They had risked everything to protect people they might never meet, on a world most of them had probably never visited. As he returned to his quarters that evening, Veltar tried to compose his initial report. But every time he began writing, he found himself staring at the words without understanding their meaning. How could he explain to the council that humans did not fight rationally? How could he describe Engineer Nabi singing while repairing systems in the middle of combat? How could he convey Lieutenant Doyen's refusal to leave his post despite serious injury? Most disturbing of all was the memory of something Corporal Juan had said after the battle. When Veltar thanked the young soldier for shielding him from debris during an explosion, Juan had simply replied, "You are crew now." Crew now, as if protecting a stranger was the most natural thing in the world. Veltar sealed his preliminary notes and marked them classified. He would need much more observation before he could begin to understand what he had witnessed today. But already, deep in his mind, a terrible suspicion was beginning to form. What if humans did not fight to win battles? What if they fought to win wars? 3 weeks had passed since the battle at Kepler 442, and Veltar found himself struggling to understand what he was documenting. The Teguk had undergone emergency repairs at a human naval station, and Veltar had used the time to conduct interviews with crew members. Each conversation left him more confused than the last. He sat in the ship's small dining area with Communications Officer Suman, a quiet woman with observant eyes. She had been explaining human communication protocols when Veltar decided to ask more direct questions. "Suman, help me understand something," he said, setting down his cup of the bitter liquid humans called coffee. "At Kepler 442, your ship took severe damage. Many crew members were injured, yet everyone seemed satisfied with the outcome." Suman considered this while eating her meal. We protected the colonists. The mission succeeded. But the cost was very high. In most military doctrines, such losses would be considered unacceptable for a minor border skirmish. Minor? Sumin looked genuinely surprised. Observer, they were targeting civilians, families. There is nothing minor about that. Veltar had heard similar responses from other crew members. They all seemed to view protecting non-combatants as worth any sacrifice. But surely there are limits to what you would risk, some cost too high to pay? For protecting innocent people? Sumin shook her head. No, there are no limits. Before Veltar could respond, Medical Officer Tay joined them at the table. The middle-aged doctor had been treating the wounded for days, working with little sleep. His face showed exhaustion, but his manner remained calm and professional. How are the injured crew members? Veltar asked. They will recover, Dr. Tay replied, though Lieutenant Doyen will carry scars from his arm wound. He refuses skin grafts that would remove them completely. Why would he want to keep scars? Dr. Tay and Suman exchanged a look that Veltar was beginning to recognize, the expression humans made when they thought he was missing something obvious. Scars are reminders, Dr. Tay explained patiently. They tell stories. Doyen's scars will remind him of the day he helped save innocent lives. Why would he want to forget that? Veltar made notes on his data pad, but the words felt inadequate. How could he explain to the council that humans voluntarily kept evidence of their suffering as badges of honor? Later that day, he joined Commander Wu Jin for the evening meal. The Marine commander was a large, quiet man who carried himself with the easy confidence of someone comfortable with violence. Veltar had been trying to understand human military philosophy, and Wu Jin seemed like the right person to ask. Commander, I have been studying your species' approach to warfare, Veltar began carefully. Your tactics seem unusually aggressive compared to other civilizations. Wu Jin chewed his food thoughtfully. Aggressive how? Most species fight for territory, resources, political advantage. They accept losses when the cost becomes too high. Humans seem to fight differently. We do not fight for territory, Wu Jin agreed. We fight for principles. What kind of principles? The right to exist as we choose. The right to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The right to live without fear. Wu Jin set down his utensils. Observer, do you know about Earth's history? Veltar consulted his data files. Some basic information. Your species has been engaged in warfare for most of recorded history. More than that. We have fought wars that threatened to destroy our entire planet. Wars where entire nations threw everything they had into the fight. Millions of people died to stop enemies who wanted to enslave or exterminate others. That seems wasteful. Wu Jin's expression hardened slightly. Wasteful? Tell me, observer, if someone threatened to destroy your family, your home, everything you loved, what would you consider too high a price to stop them? Veltar thought about this in his own culture. Such threats were handled through negotiation, compromise, gradual accommodation. We would find a peaceful solution, some arrangement that satisfied both parties. And if the other party refused to negotiate? If they demanded your complete surrender or destruction? That rarely happens. Most conflicts can be resolved through reasonable discussion. Most conflicts with reasonable opponents, Wu Jin corrected. But what about unreasonable ones? What about enemies who want to destroy you simply because you exist? Veltar had no answer for this. In his experience, such absolute conflicts were theoretical concepts, not practical realities. Humans learned long ago that some enemies cannot be negotiated with, Wu Jin continued. They can only be defeated, and defeating them requires being willing to pay any price necessary. Any price? Any price. Wu Jin's voice carried absolute conviction. We do not fight to win territory or gain resources. We fight to ensure our enemy can never threaten us again. That requires total victory, no matter what it costs. That evening, Veltar requested access to human historical databases. What he found made him physically ill. Humans had indeed fought wars of total destruction. They had developed weapons capable of ending their own civilization and used them. They had killed millions of their own species to prevent other humans from conquering them. They had turned entire continents into battlefields. Most disturbing of all, they had won these wars not through superior technology or numbers, but through sheer determination to continue fighting regardless of losses. He read about something called the Battle of Stalingrad, where humans fought for months in the ruins of their own city rather than surrender. He learned about kamikaze pilots who flew their aircraft into enemy ships, choosing certain death to inflict damage. He studied accounts of civilians who fought with improvised weapons rather than submit to occupation. The pattern was clear and terrifying. When threatened with extinction, humans did not surrender or seek compromise. They became more dangerous, not less. The next morning brought news that would test these observations in real time. "Observer Veltar to the bridge," came the announcement over the ship's communication system. Captain Jiho's voice carried an urgency that made Veltar move quickly. He found the bridge crew gathered around the tactical display, their faces grim. Captain Jiho looked up as he entered. "We have received a priority message from command," the captain said. "The hegemony has launched a major offensive against our border colonies. 3 systems are under attack. The enemy force is substantial." Veltar studied the tactical display. Red markers indicated hegemony ships, dozens of them, far more than he had expected to see in a regional conflict. "How substantial?" he asked. "Approximately 200 ships," Tactical Officer Mira replied, "including battlecruisers and assault carriers. Intelligence estimates they have committed roughly 30% of their total military force to this offensive." Veltar felt a chill run through his system. This was not a border raid or territorial dispute. This was an invasion force designed to crush human resistance permanently. "What are your orders?" he asked, expecting to hear about defensive positions and strategic withdrawals. "We join the fleet assembling at New Seoul," Captain Jiho said simply. "We are going to stop them." "Captain, forgive me, but you are outnumbered by a significant margin. How many ships does humanity have available?" 47 combat vessels, Mira replied. Veltar stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The humans were outnumbered more than 4 to 1. No rational military force would engage under such conditions. "Surely you will wait for reinforcements, or attempt diplomatic solutions." Captain Jiho looked at him with an expression Veltar was beginning to know well. The look humans gave when he suggested something they considered impossible. "Observer, they have attacked our worlds. They are threatening our families, our children, our way of life." The captain's voice remained calm, but something in his eyes had changed, something that made Veltar step back involuntarily. "We do not negotiate with those who target innocent civilians. We do not wait for better odds, we stop them now, whatever it takes." As the Taeguk set course for New Seoul, Veltar tried to process what he was witnessing. The humans were preparing to fight a battle they could not possibly win. They were heading into combat against overwhelming odds with no apparent concern for the consequences. But what terrified him most was the mood aboard the ship. The crew was not afraid or resigned to defeat. They were eager. They moved with purpose and determination, as if they were finally getting the chance to do what they were born for. Veltar returned to his quarters and tried to write a preliminary report for the council. But his hands shook as he typed, and the words seemed inadequate to convey what he was learning about human nature. These were not the young, naive beings the council had expected to catalog and dismiss. These were something else entirely. Something that fought not just to survive, but to ensure their enemies regretted ever threatening them in the first place. The human fleet assembled at New Seoul was the most beautiful and terrifying sight Veltar had ever witnessed. 47 ships arranged in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming under the system's star. Each vessel bristled with weapons, but what struck Veltar most was their size. They were all smaller than the hegemony battlecruisers they would soon face. Admiral Hyan commanded the fleet from the dreadnought Seoul's Pride. Veltar had been granted permission to observe from the flagship's bridge, where he now stood watching the final preparations for battle. Around him, Human officers worked with calm efficiency, as if preparing for another routine patrol instead of what appeared to be certain annihilation. Hegemony fleet detected at the edge of the system, reported the sensor operator. 212 ships led by the battleship Dominion's Fist. Estimated arrival in 4 hours. Admiral Hyan studied the tactical display without expression. She was a small woman with graying hair, but when she spoke, every person on the bridge listened with absolute attention. "Signal the civilian transports," she ordered. "Begin evacuation of non-essential personnel from New Sol orbital stations. Priority to families with children." Veltar watched the evacuation begin on the secondary screens. Thousands of humans, men, women, children, elderly, boarding transport ships that would carry them away from the coming battle. The sight reminded him that this was not just about military conquest. Millions of civilian lives hung in the balance. "Admiral," he said carefully, "perhaps this would be an appropriate time to consider negotiation. The Council could mediate. Discussions with the hegemony leadership." Admiral Hyan turned to look at him. Her eyes held the same expression Veltar had seen in Captain Jiho. Not anger, but something deeper and more dangerous. "Observer, what exactly do you think we should negotiate? Should we discuss which of our children the hegemony gets to enslave? Which of our worlds they get to strip bare? How many of our people they get to kill for their entertainment? Surely some compromise could be reached. The hegemony already made their position clear when they attacked civilian colonies, Admiral." Hyun interrupted. "They want us gone. Dead or enslaved, they do not care which. There is nothing to negotiate." She turned back to the tactical display. "Communications. Signal all ships." Message reads, "Today we defend not just our territory, but our right to exist. The enemy thinks we will break because we are outnumbered. They do not understand that being outnumbered is when humans fight best. Make them remember this day." The hegemony fleet emerged from hyperspace in a formation designed to overwhelm and intimidate. Massive battle cruisers flanked by escort vessels, their combined firepower capable of reducing planets to rubble. At the center flew the Dominion's Fist, a ship larger than most human space stations. "All ships weapons-free," Admiral Hyan commanded. "Execute Plan Samson." Veltar consulted his files but found no reference to Plan Samson. "Admiral, what does that designation mean?" Admiral Hyan's expression was grim. "You will see, Observer. You will see what humans become when everything we love is threatened." The battle began with a coordinated hegemony assault intended to break the human formation immediately. Energy beams and missile salvos filled space between the fleets. The humans responded not with defensive maneuvering, but with a direct charge into the enemy formation. Veltar watched in horror as the first human ships took massive damage. The destroyer Busan's Hope lost its forward section to a direct hit, but continued firing with its remaining weapons. The cruiser Freedom's Call rammed a hegemony frigate when its engines failed, both ships exploding in a ball of plasma. "Admiral, we are taking severe casualties," reported the tactical officer. 12 ships destroyed or disabled in the first 10 minutes. "Understood," Admiral Hyan replied calmly. "Continue the attack." This was madness. Any rational commander would withdraw, after losing a quarter of their force. But the humans pressed forward, each ship fighting as if it were the only thing standing between the enemy and total victory. Captain Siak of the heavy cruiser Incheon's Valor transmitted a message that chilled Veltar to his core. "Admiral, my ship is critically damaged, requesting permission to execute final maneuver." "Permission granted, Captain. Fair winds." Veltar watched as the Incheon's Valor turned toward the enemy flagship, accelerating to ramming speed. Captain Siak's voice came over the communication channel one last time. "Tell my son that sometimes the only way to win is to refuse to lose." The cruiser struck the Dominion's Fist amidships at near light speed. The explosion was visible across the entire battlefield, a star-bright flash that briefly outshone the system's sun. When the light faded, both ships were gone. But the human attack continued. Squadron Commander Aaron led her fighters in a desperate assault on the hegemony carrier Endless Victory. Her pilots flew through a maze of defensive fire that should have destroyed them instantly. When their weapons ran out, they began ramming attacks. "Squadron, this is Aaron," came her voice over the tactical channel, switching to emergency power. "All remaining fuel to weapon systems." Veltar realized what she meant. The fighters were ejecting their life support systems to power one final weapons barrage. The pilots would have perhaps 30 seconds of consciousness before the cold vacuum of space killed them. They used those 30 seconds to cripple the carrier. Engineering teams aboard human ships performed impossible repairs under combat conditions. Chief Engineer Changman of the Soul's Pride stayed behind to manually detonate his ship's power core when Hegemony Marines breached the hull. His sacrifice took out 2 enemy boarding craft and saved hundreds of crew members. Throughout the battle, communications specialist Yunji continued transmitting evacuation coordinates to civilian transports even as her station burned around her. Veltar watched her die at her post, still broadcasting, her final transmission saving the lives of 3,000 evacuating families. The tide of battle slowly turned, but at a cost that horrified Veltar. Of the 47 human ships that had begun the fight, only 8 remained functional. The space around New Sol was filled with debris and bodies. By any military standard, this was a catastrophic defeat. Yet somehow, the Hegemony fleet was withdrawing. "Damage assessment," Admiral Hyon called out. "Enemy forces down to 63 ships," the tactical officer reported. "Their flagship destroyed along with both carriers and most of their heavy cruisers. They are requesting permission to withdraw." Veltar stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The humans had been outnumbered 5-1. They had lost most of their fleet, yet they had inflicted such damage on the enemy that the Hegemony was retreating. "Grant their request," Admiral Hyon said. "But transmit this message to their fleet commander. Tell your leaders that this is what happens when you threaten human families. If you ever attack our civilians again, we will not be so merciful." As the surviving Hegemony ships limped away, Veltar tried to process what he had witnessed. The humans had not won through superior technology or numbers. They had won through sheer refusal to accept defeat. They had made victory so costly that their enemies preferred retreat to continued fighting. "Admiral," he said quietly, "your losses were enormous. Was this truly victory?" Admiral Hyon looked at him with tired eyes. "Observer, 50,000 civilians evacuated safely because we held this line. 3 worlds remain free because we paid the price to keep them free. If that is not victory, what is?" That night, as rescue teams searched for survivors among the wreckage, Veltar sat in his quarters trying to write his report. But every time he began, his hands would start shaking and he would have to stop. He had watched an entire fleet sacrifice itself to protect people they would never meet. He had seen humans choose certain death rather than allow their enemies to threaten innocent lives. He had witnessed something that broke every model of rational behavior he had ever studied. The more humans did not fight to win battles. They fought to make their enemies afraid to start wars, and that realization terrified him more than any weapon ever could. Because if humans were willing to pay such prices to protect strangers, what would they be willing to do to protect each other? What would they become if someone truly threatened their survival as a species? Veltar sealed his preliminary observations and marked them with the highest security classification. Some knowledge was too dangerous to share carelessly. He was beginning to understand why the Council had really sent him here. They had not wanted to assess human military capabilities. They had wanted to know if humanity could be controlled, and the answer to that question was becoming terrifyingly clear.